At his age, I smiled as I reflected on him. He was so kind, and I felt fortunate to have him in my life. However, that night I was too exhausted to think clearly. A heaviness settled over me, and I felt drowsy. Suddenly, I heard a gentle knock on my bedroom door. I stirred slightly, wondering if it was merely a figment of my dream. But the knock came again, soft yet persistent, and I was fully awake. "Mom," I heard Daniel's voice, soft but enough to rouse me. I blinked, attempting to focus on the door, where I could make out Daniel's silhouette in the faint light spilling from the hallway. I sat up, trying to shake off my sleepiness. "Daniel, what's the matter?" I inquired, my voice still heavy with sleep. He hesitated before entering the room, quietly closing the door behind him. He seemed unsure about stepping inside. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the floor as he lingered near my bed. I felt a surge of concern, sensing that something was troubling him. The divorce had been hard on Daniel. He occasionally struggled with insomnia, but rarely spoke of it. I understood that his father's departure had affected him more deeply than he let on, and tonight, I could clearly see the sorrow in his eyes. "Come here," I said gently, motioning for him to join me. There was an unoccupied space beside me on the mattress, and I offered, "You can stay with me tonight if you need to." He paused for a moment before moving closer and lying down next to me, turning onto his side to face me. In the soft light, I noticed how weary he appeared, a sight that was unusual for him. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked gently. Daniel shook his head, his dark hair falling over his eyes. "No, I just wanted to be near you." A warmth spread through my heart. It had been some time since Daniel had sought closeness like this, reminiscent of his younger days. I reached out to tuck his hair behind his ear, smiling at him. "It's all right," I murmured, placing my hand gently on his shoulder. "You can stay for as long as you need." He smiled faintly in response, but I could still sense something troubling him, something he wasn't ready to discuss. Rather than press him, I reclined, pulled the blanket over us, and allowed the silence to envelop us. We lay there for a while, embracing the tranquility. Daniel's breathing gradually slowed, and I thought he had drifted off to sleep. But then he spoke again, his voice so soft that I almost missed it. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" His question caught me off guard, yet I understood what he meant. Discussing his father was a topic I had steered clear of for years, one for which I struggled to find the right words. I confessed softly that I occasionally thought about it, but things had never been right between us. Daniel nodded, yet I could sense his desire for deeper understanding. "Do you ever wonder if things could have been different?" he asked. I sighed, reflecting on my regrets. "Perhaps," I replied, "but we can't change what happened. We must move forward." Daniel seemed lost in thought, fiddling with the edge of the blanket. "I just wonder if I could have done something differently. You know, like if I had been better," he said, and his words pierced my heart. I sat up. I approached Daniel, determined to confront him. "No, this isn't your fault," I said earnestly. "You didn't do anything wrong." He averted his gaze, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes I think if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him into a tight embrace. He hesitated for a moment, but then returned the hug, burying his face in my shoulder. "Daniel, please listen to me," I urged, my voice trembling. "Your dad made his own choices. It had nothing to do with you. It was his decision, and it was never your responsibility. You've always been more than enough for me," I softly murmured, my voice infused with affection and reassurance. "You mean everything to me." He nodded against my shoulder, yet I could still perceive the tension within him, the weight of years filled with unspoken pain and guilt. We held each other closely, the silence enveloping us like a soothing balm. Gradually, his body relaxed, and his breathing deepened as he slipped into slumber. However, as he peacefully rested beside me, my mind raced, thoughts and memories swirling in the shadows. We had both endured so much, and yet, amidst the tranquil comfort of our shared embrace, an unexpected feeling emerged. Awakened within me a sensation I struggled to identify. It transformed into a warmth that spread through my chest, a connection that felt more profound and intimate than the typical bond shared between a mother and her son. I tried to brush it aside, focusing instead on the rhythm of his breathing, but the feeling lingered, a persistent whisper that refused to be ignored. Morning arrived too swiftly, as the gentle light of dawn bathed the room in soft hues. Daniel lay peacefully beside me, his face serene and relaxed, the tension of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I observed him for a moment, my heart swelling with love and contentment. Yet that unexpected feeling remained. A persistent undercurrent of unease simmered beneath my maternal affection. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb him, and made my way downstairs to prepare breakfast. The familiar routine of cooking offered a semblance of normalcy, yet my mind kept drifting back to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been sensitive, but I hadn't fully grasped the extent to which he had internalized his father's absence. The guilt he bore weighed heavily on my heart, a burden I wished I could lighten. However, it wasn't just the emotions that occupied my thoughts. It was the way he had looked at me, the vulnerability reflected in his eyes, and the unspoken longing for something more. If only I could. In an honest moment with myself, the warmth I experienced while holding him awakened something profound within me, a bond that surpassed the limits of our familial roles. I attempted to dismiss the thought, reminding myself that he had transformed into my son. Yet, the feeling lingered, a persistent whisper that would not be quieted. Before long, Daniel stirred from his slumber, his hair disheveled and his tall, slender figure still showing signs of youth. But there was a hint of maturity in his gaze, a glimpse of the person he was becoming. I welcomed him with a heartfelt smile, attempting to conceal the residual emotions from the previous night. I greeted the morning with a gentle nudge, placing a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Good morning," I said, as he mumbled in response, settling into his chair and eagerly diving into his breakfast. We enjoyed a comfortable silence, the soft morning light casting a warm glow throughout the kitchen. Occasionally, I felt his gaze linger on me, but I decided against addressing the events of the night before. He appeared more relaxed, more like his true self, and I didn't want to disturb the delicate peace we had found. Eventually, Daniel broke the silence, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I wanted to." His vulnerability took me by surprise. "You never need to thank me, Daniel. I will always be here for you," I assured him. He nodded, yet his eyes remained locked onto mine, an unspoken question hanging between us. I found myself unsure of how to respond or how to maneuver through the subtle change in our relationship. There was a newfound intensity in his gaze, a desire for a bond that went beyond the conventional limits of mother and son. A part of me, one I had never allowed myself to acknowledge before, felt it as well. After breakfast, he stayed by the counter, his arms. As he traced patterns on the countertop, he quietly inquired, "Do you ever think things might have been different?" His voice was laden with unspoken emotions. I let out a sigh, feeling the weight of regret pressing down on me. "Perhaps," I replied gently, "but we cannot change what has already happened. All we can do is strive to move forward." Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on his fidgeting hands. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something differently. If I could have been better," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, tinged with guilt and self-blame. His words struck a chord deep within me, and I instinctively reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. As I enveloped him in a tender embrace, I whispered to Daniel, "You haven't done anything wrong. None of this is your fault." My voice trembled with emotion. He averted his gaze, his voice barely breaking through. "It feels like if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears filled my eyes as I held him tighter. He hesitated for a moment but then yielded, burying his face in my shoulder. "Daniel, listen to me," I said firmly. "Your father's decisions were his alone, just as yours are. His departure was more than adequate. It had nothing to do with you." He nodded slowly, his body relaxing against mine, the tension in his shoulders gradually dissipating as he sank into the embrace. I sensed that unfamiliar warmth rising within me once again, a blend of relief, affection, and an undeniable sense of connection. The relationship we once defined as mother and son appeared to be shifting, evolving into something new, something neither of us completely comprehended yet both instinctively sensed. For now, I held him close, allowing the moment to linger without questions or explanations. I wasn't certain where this would lead. A newfound intimacy could guide us, yet I understood that the life we once knew was shifting, and this was merely the start. As I lay enveloped in darkness, warmed by my son's presence, a deep awareness washed over me. The fragile balance of our relationship felt precarious, teetering on the edge of something novel and unexplored. A shiver of anxiety coursed through me, a murmur of doubt about what this change might mean for us. However, amid the unease, there was an undeniable sense of excitement, a realization that we were embarking on a journey into the unknown. The dawn broke gently, with soft rays of sunlight reaching out. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, it gently stirred me from my sleep. Beside me, Daniel lay peacefully, his face calm and cozy, seemingly free from the burdens of the previous night. I observed him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal affection. Yet beneath that warmth, a distinct emotion stirred within me, an elusive feeling that I struggled to articulate. It was the same surprising sensation that had lingered at the edges of my awareness the night before, a feeling that both intrigued and unsettled me. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb his slumber, and made my way downstairs to the comforting routine of preparing breakfast. As I stood at the stove, as I flipped pancakes with practiced ease, my thoughts wandered back to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been a sensitive individual, yet I had failed to comprehend the depth of his internal turmoil, the burden of his father's absence and the guilt he carried, a secret he had kept hidden for far too long. This weighed heavily on my heart, but there was more to it than that. I noticed a change in his demeanor, a longing for comfort in my touch that surpassed the usual boundaries between mother and son. If I were to be honest with myself, I had felt it as well, a warmth that enveloped me when I held him, a solace that transcended the ordinary. Setting aside my maternal instincts, I tried to concentrate on the task at hand. He's just a boy, I reminded myself, your son. Yet, the feeling persisted, a constant whisper that wouldn't fade away. Daniel eventually stirred from his slumber, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His tousled hair was a snapshot of youthful innocence, but there was a hint of newfound maturity in his gaze, a glimpse of the person he was becoming. I welcomed him with a warm smile, trying to conceal the emotions that lingered from the previous night. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I exclaimed, placing a plate of golden pancakes sizzled on the stove as he mumbled, settling into his chair and eagerly devouring his breakfast. We shared a comfortable silence, the morning sunlight casting a warm glow over the kitchen. Occasionally, I felt his gaze on me, but I chose to remain quiet, not ready to explore the complexities of the revelations from the previous night. He seemed more at ease, more like his true self, and I didn't want to disturb the fragile peace we had established. Eventually, he broke the silence, his voice tinged with gratitude. "Thank you for last night, Mom. I really needed that." His vulnerability took me by surprise. "There's no need to thank me, Daniel," I assured him. "I will always be here for you, no matter what." He nodded, but his gaze lingered, a silent question reflected in his eyes, a mirror of the unexpressed emotions I had been wrestling with. His eyes held a depth, an intensity that surpassed the familiar comfort of our mother-son relationship. The day unfolded without incident. Daniel retreated to his room, engrossed in homework and video games, while I occupied myself with household chores. Yet, an imperceptible shift had occurred between us. A subtle tension, an unspoken recognition of the deeper bond that had begun to form as the day progressed. As evening descended, my thoughts drifted back to Daniel and his journey from boyhood to young manhood, reflecting on the closeness we had experienced the night before. The more I pondered, the clearer it became that my feelings for him had transformed, surpassing the limits of maternal affection. That night, after dinner, we settled onto the sofa to watch a film. The room was softly illuminated, with the flickering images on the screen casting playful shadows across the walls. We mostly sat in silence, content in each other's company, but as the movie progressed, I became acutely aware of his nearness. Each time his arm brushed against mine with the slightest movement, my heart raced, and I attempted to, while we were focused on the film, an undercurrent of anxiety enveloped us, creating a silent symphony of unexpressed emotions. Midway through the movie, Daniel leaned closer, his arm brushing against mine, and this time he didn't pull away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness coursing through me. I glanced at him, and our eyes locked, his gaze revealing a newfound depth, a mirror of the feelings I had been trying to keep at bay all day. Without even thinking, I reached out and took his hand, our fingers intertwining. He didn't pull back. Instead, he gently squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin. That simple gesture sent a flutter through me. A feeling both familiar and thrilling coursed through my heart as we sat together, our arms intertwined in the soft glow of the dim light. It was a silent testament to the evolving nature of our relationship, a pivotal moment filled with unspoken understanding that surpassed the boundaries of our familial roles. I couldn't foresee what the future would bring, but I sensed that things were shifting. Dan was no longer just my son. He had become something more, someone I cared for in a way that defied definition. The film concluded, yet we remained on the couch, the credits rolling unnoticed. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. I inhaled deeply. It was a subtle gesture, yet it carried a weight of intimacy, a quiet recognition of the bond that was blossoming between us. "Mother," Daniel murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I am truly glad you are here." His words, simple yet deeply meaningful, resonated within my heart. I felt a sense of contentment. He too had transformed, reveling in this unexpected closeness. This newfound intimacy was both thrilling and daunting. As I lay there in the darkness, wrapped in the warmth of my son's embrace, a profound realization washed over me. The delicate balance of our relationship, transformed into a state of transition, I found myself teetering on the edge of something novel and unexplored. A tremor of unease surged through me, a faint whisper of doubt regarding what this change might signify for us. Yet, amid the trepidation, there was an undeniable sense of excitement, a recognition that this was merely the beginning of a journey into the unknown. The dawn arrived with gentle insistence, the soft tendrils of sunlight weaving through the curtains, rousing me from my slumber. Beside me, Daniel lay peacefully, his face calm and relaxed, the burdens of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I observed him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal warmth. Love, yet beneath that, a unique affection stirred within me, evoking a sensation I struggled to articulate. It transformed into the same peculiar feeling that had lingered at the periphery of my awareness the previous night, a sensation that both fascinated and unsettled me. I quietly slipped off the bed, careful not to disturb his peaceful slumber, and made my way downstairs to the familiar routine of preparing breakfast. As I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, my thoughts wandered back to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been a sensitive spirit, but I had not fully comprehended the depth of his internal struggles, the weight of his father's absence and the guilt he carried. The secret he had concealed for far too long now pressed heavily on my heart. Yet there was more to it than that. I sensed a change in his behavior, a way he sought refuge in my embrace, a yearning for a connection that surpassed the conventional limits of mother and son. If I were honest with myself, I had experienced it as well. A warmth enveloped me when I held him, a solace that extended beyond mere maternal instinct. I pushed the thought aside, concentrating on the task at hand. He was just a boy, I reminded myself, your son. Yet, the feeling persisted, a constant whisper that refused to fade away. In the end, Daniel, who had been silenced, finally emerged from his slumber, rubbing the remnants of sleep from his eyes. His tousled hair gave him an air of youthful innocence, yet there was a newfound maturity reflected in his gaze, a hint of the person he was becoming. I welcomed him with a warm smile, attempting to conceal the lingering emotions from the previous night. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I chirped, placing a plate of golden pancakes in front of him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and eagerly digging into his breakfast. We shared a comfortable silence, the morning sunlight enveloping the kitchen in a soft, warm glow. Occasionally, I felt his eyes on me, but I chose to remain quiet, prepared to explore the intricacies of the previous night's revelations. He appeared more at ease, more like his true self. I was reluctant to disturb the fragile tranquility we had finally achieved. Eventually, he shattered the silence, his voice tinged with appreciation. "Thank you for last night, Mother," he said, and his vulnerability took me by surprise. "You never need to thank me, Daniel," I assured him. "I will always be here for you, no matter what." He nodded, yet his gaze remained, a silent question lingering in his eyes, a reflection of the unspoken feelings I had been wrestling with. His eyes possessed a depth that transcended the ordinary. Familiar with the comfort provided by our mothers, the day unfolded without incident. Daniel withdrew to his room, engrossed in both homework and video games, while I occupied myself with household tasks. Yet, an imperceptible shift lingered in the air between us, a subtle tension, an unvoiced recognition of the deeper bond that had formed. As day turned to night, my thoughts drifted back to Daniel, reflecting on his evolution from boyhood to young manhood and the intimacy we had experienced the previous evening. The more I contemplated, the clearer it became that my feelings for him had deepened, surpassing the confines of maternal affection. After dinner, we settled onto the sofa to watch a movie. The room was softly illuminated, with the flickering images on the screen casting playful shadows on the walls. We mostly sat in silence, content in each other's company. However, as the film unfolded, I became increasingly aware of his closeness. Each subtle movement brought his arm brushing against mine, causing my heart to race. I attempted to focus on the movie, but the tension between us was unmistakable, a silent symphony of unspoken feelings. Midway through the film, Daniel shifted even closer, his arm pressing against mine, and this time he didn't pull away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness coursing through me. GL cast a quick glance in my direction, and as our eyes locked, I noticed a profound depth in his gaze, a mirror of the emotions I had been trying to bury all day. Without even realizing it, I reached out and took his hand, our fingers intertwining effortlessly. He didn't pull away. Instead, he gently squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing a slow circle on my skin. This simple gesture sent a flutter through my heart, a feeling that was both familiar and thrillingly new. We remained like that for a while, our palms joined in the soft light, a silent testament to the evolving nature of our relationship. It marked a pivotal moment, an unspoken understanding that surpassed the limitations of our family dynamics. I found myself uncertain about what the future might bring. Yet, I recognized that our relationship was evolving. Daniel was no longer just my son. He had transformed into something more significant, someone I cherished in a way that defied categorization. As the film concluded and the credits began to roll, we lingered on the couch, lost in our thoughts. I rested my head on his shoulder, attuned to the gentle rhythm of his breathing. This simple act, though small, felt deeply intimate, a quiet recognition of the bond that was flourishing between us. Daniel, my mom's partner, murmured softly, "Yeah, I'm really glad you're here." His words, though simple, resonated deeply within my heart. I felt a surge of happiness that he was present, grateful for this unexpected closeness and the newfound intimacy that was both thrilling and daunting. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly felt alive. There was no confusion, no guilt, just the pure, undeniable truth of our love. It was a love forged from years of shared experiences, trust, and understanding that ran deeper than mere blood ties. It was a love that felt as instinctive as breathing, as unavoidable as the dawn. We lay there, enveloped in the aftermath of our mutual desire, the quiet only broken by the soft cadence of our breaths. Daniel eventually turned to me, his gaze meeting mine with a warmth that melted my heart. "Are we okay?" he asked, his voice a soothing touch in the darkness. I nodded, momentarily speechless, my heart brimming with emotions that words couldn't capture. "Yeah," I finally whispered, my voice heavy with unspoken truths. Later that evening, after the remnants of dinner had been cleared away, as the chaos subsided, our home settled into a serene calmness. Daniel and I found ourselves on the back porch, enveloped by the tranquility of the night. The air was crisp and cool, with stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the vast expanse of the sky. For the first time in weeks, I experienced a sense of release, a lifting of the weight that had been bearing down on me. We didn't speak much, words felt superfluous. Simply being near him, sharing the quiet beauty of the evening, was sufficient. There was no urgency, no pressure, only a comfortable silence that conveyed so much. This connection between us was profound, naturally unfolding. I once found solace in letting it flourish at its own rhythm. He took my hand, his touch igniting a warmth within me that spread like wildfire. I smiled, gently squeezing his hand as we sat there, our fingers entwined, enveloped in the soft glow of the starlight. It was a love that defied definition, a bond that surpassed the boundaries of our familial roles. In that moment, beneath the vastness of the night sky, I realized that no matter what challenges awaited us, we would confront them together. As the days turned into weeks, the closeness between us intensified, intricately intertwining with the fabric of our daily lives. There was no need for labels or definitions. It simply transformed into something profound. It manifested in the way our eyes locked, in the lingering touches, and in the quiet moments we cherished together, crafting a world that was uniquely ours. With each passing day, our bond became stronger and more palpable. The conflict I had initially experienced faded away, replaced by a deep sense of belonging, a feeling that this was exactly where I was meant to be. Daniel was no longer just my son. He had become my partner, my confidant, my beloved. Our relationship has flourished into something truly exquisite, something that has satisfied a need we hadn't even realized existed. It wasn't until a rainy afternoon in the late autumn that the full depth of our love enveloped me. The sky transformed into a canvas of stormy grays, with the rain tapping a steady rhythm against the windows. Daniel and I were nestled together on the sofa in the living room, the fire crackling and casting a warm glow throughout the space. Wrapped in a blanket, the heat from the flames and the intimacy of our closeness created a sanctuary from the tempest outside. Daniel leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder. I rested my shoulder against him, my fingers absent-mindedly weaving through his hair, relishing the serene intimacy of the moment. The rain against the windows blurred the outside world, creating a sense of seclusion, as if we were enveloped in our own little universe. I could feel his breathing slow and steady, and without a word exchanged, I understood that he was experiencing the same shift in our connection, the same undeniable attraction towards something more profound. He lifted his head, our eyes locking, and in that instant, the reality of our love resonated between us. It wasn't merely affection. It was a bond that transcended the conventional roles we had played, a connection that had evolved into something deeper, something truly extraordinary. "Plain mother," he murmured, his voice heavy with emotion. I stayed quiet, anticipating his next words, aware that whatever he was about to say would change everything. "I love you," he admitted, reaching out to grasp my hand. "Not just because you're my mother, but because of who you are, everything about you. I'm not sure if it's right or wrong, but I can't help it." His words enveloped me like a warm wave, filling the space with a love that made my heart ache in the most beautiful way. I had sensed his feelings, but hearing him articulate them, recognizing the depth of his emotions, made it all the more profound. I tightened my grip on his hand, sensing the steady beat of his heart beneath my fingertips. "Daniel," I murmured, my voice quivering just a bit, "I really like you too. I've always held you dear, but this feels different." He nodded, his gaze probing mine for comfort, seeking answers to the silent question lingering in the air between us. I'm not entirely sure what this means, I continued, but I know I feel the same way, and it doesn't feel wrong to me. Feels right. A soft smile graced his lips, and my heart swelled with a joy I had never encountered before. I'm glad you feel that way, he murmured, because I can't imagine what I would do if you didn't. I reached up, gently stroking his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips. We'll figure this out, I assured him. For a moment we sat in silence, our eyes locked. The only sounds were the soft patter of rain and the crackling of the fire. Words were unnecessary. We had already expressed everything that mattered. We both understood our feelings, and we both knew they were genuine. Daniel leaned in slowly, his gaze locked onto mine. With a gentle hesitance, he kissed me, and it transformed into a tender, smooth embrace filled with all the love and longing we had held onto for so long. There was no urgency, no rush, just a pure expression of our profound connection. When he finally pulled back, his eyes brimmed with emotion, and I realized we had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. Yet instead of feeling anxious, I was enveloped in a sense of peace, a realization that this was exactly where we were meant to be. He drew me closer, his hands wrapping around me. Surrounded by one another, we embraced our differences as the rain persisted to pour. The fireplace emitted a warm glow that enveloped us, and in that moment, I realized that challenges awaited us. Yet we would confront them side by side. The remainder of the evening became a haze of soft caresses, hushed conversations, and tender kisses. We refrained from discussing the future or the implications of our newfound love. All that mattered was the present, the intimacy we shared in that moment. As the rain continued its gentle serenade, I marveled at how swiftly our relationship had evolved. Daniel had transformed from a boy into something much more. As we transformed into a couple, our connection evolved into something unexpected, something beautiful, something that suited us flawlessly. That evening, Daniel returned to my room, but this time there was no reluctance. He slipped into bed beside me, his arms encircling me, drawing me close. It wasn't the tender embrace of a mother and child. It was the embrace of equals, of lovers, our souls entwined. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady cadence of his heartbeat. A melody of love and tranquility. A sense of peace washed over me, one I hadn't felt in years, a wholeness I had never truly recognized I possessed. I felt a void as this evolved into something significant. I was ready for it, Daniel and I had always been near, but now we have transformed into something greater, something that eludes definition. We have become partners, passionate allies, souls intertwined by a profound connection. A love that surpassed the limits of tradition as I gently fell into slumber. A smile graced my lips, transforming into something wild. I was aware of it, yet it felt absolutely wonderful.